you all for joining us for Pando Days. My name is Eugene Shirley, and I'm the president of Pando, an environmental and social impact accelerator based in Los Angeles County. Pando Days is bringing the art, design, architecture, and sustainability programs together from 10 Southland colleges and universities to help LA County implement its ambitious new sustainability plan. Now, each of the participating Pando Days institutions adopted a different goal from the county's plan and created ingenious plans of their own for implementing it. Brainstorming began in the fall of last year with project development over as many as 7 months. Make sure you go to our website, pandopopulous.com, to see all the school project descriptions and read through their presentation materials. All of the 10 premier events follow the same format, hosted by a member of the Pando Board of Directors, with a summary presentation of the featured project by the team lead. Short responses and questions then follow from members of the Chief Sustainability Officer Task Force for LA County. That's followed in turn by a period of public Q&A. By the way, if you have questions, enter your questions into the chat box at any time, and we'll get to them towards the end of the program. We'll close by the end of the hour. All projects are being assessed by a panel of judges based on recordings of these presentations and supporting materials. When we come together on July 25 for the finale, we'll hear which projects they believe have the greatest chance for the greatest impact for county sustainability. Pando Days host for today is Rob Flo. Rob is a member of the Pando Board of Directors and president and CEO of Flo Financial Partners based in Pasadena. If you came to the sneak preview event for Pando Days in January, you'll recognize Rob as being the host of the amazing time we all had there. We are delighted to have him hosting this premier event for us today. Rob, thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks to everybody for joining us, and thank you very much to the professors and students at PCC for being an example of resiliency in completing this project during this period of time. When I first saw the goal they're working on, I sent a text to Eugene and I said, did they write this after the pandemic or before? And they had written it before the pandemic, so it's fascinating. We'll go over that. The program and presentation today is entitled Resilience Project, a virtual landscape for resilience learning. And the PCC folks are from the Visual Arts and Media Studies 3D animation program. And they're directly addressing goal number 1 of the LA County Sustainability Plan, and it states, resilient and healthy community environments where residents thrive in place. And I'm not sure they thought that it would be taken that literally, but here we are, thriving in place. And it's going to be fun to hear what you all came up with. So our presenter today, the team lead is Professor Sylvia Ragone, and she has some colleagues with her that she'll introduce. So Sylvia, go ahead and give us your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Rob, and thank you, Eugene, Shelley, and Adam, to give us the opportunity to participate in this wonderful program. So my name is Sylvia Ragone, and I teach in Design Media Arts 3D animation in the Visual Art and Media Studies Department at Pasadena City College. And today with me to present the Resilience Project, I have 3 amazing students, Gigi Hall, Megan Schultz, and Crystal Brackett, that will be available to answer your questions. So to have an overview of our project, I will recommend that you go into the chat and you will find a link in there. And if you can please copy the link, is a link to a YouTube video. And you can watch the video on your own time, and then we will reconvene to keep discussing the project. Let's count to 3 and let's all press play. 1, 2, and 3.
The Resilience Project is a virtual landscape that explores new ways of presenting data on disaster preparedness and resilience. Using art and interaction technologies, the landscape features games, media archives, and virtual reality meditations that explore the many iterations of resilience, both on practical and personal terms. In this presentation, we'll cover the genesis of the project, the research that informed our work, and some project samples. Pasadena City College was assigned Goal 1 of the Our County Sustainability Plan, which focuses on resilient and healthy community environments where residents can thrive in place. Early on, we decided to focus on one of their strategies to achieve this, which is to develop community capacity to respond to emergencies. In the last few years, responding to and recovering from emergency situations has become the norm for many who live in Southern California, where residents regularly face wildfires, earthquakes, and flooding. But given the current situation with COVID-19, this topic could not be more pressing. But because resilience is so variable and subjective, we began our research by defining it. The standard definition of resilience is as follows. The power of resilient communities is their ability to adapt to and learn from a variety of shocks and stresses and incorporate any lessons learned into preparation for and reaction to future events. While we examined practical forms of resilience and preparedness, we also thought about it in broader terms. Community resilience is about shifting a mindset from the individual to the collective, from short-term to long-term, and from singular to plural. As we face isolation on a global level, this lesson of connectivity and collectivity has never been more important. Research shows that resilient-centered problems require solutions that are flexible and holistic. These solutions often exist outside of traditional frameworks, which is why they are so hard to implement. So we decided to start with the first step towards building resilience, being informed. The usual ways of presenting information are generally outdated and impersonal. We ask, why make information stagnant when it can come alive? The Resilience Project acts as an exploratory tool for disaster preparedness, while rethinking the ways in which information can be experienced. While still in a prototype phase, we envision the Resilience Project as an educational and artistic platform that can be accessed both online and as a tool that can be used at public events, cultural spaces, and pop-up installations. Rather than a singular, standalone object or installation, we offer a plurality of perspectives, a collaborative environment that welcomes interaction and real-time learning. Because students engage so well with this kind of format, our hope is that it inspires the younger generation to think about and be prepared for the challenges they may face in their immediate future. By providing access to information that is free, diverse, and experiential, we believe that the Resilience Project is a true reflection of the ethos and community at Pasadena City College. Our first project sample is an interactive game that focuses on emergency supplies and essential items in a fire evacuation situation. The house fire game was informed by one of the actions in the Our County Sustainability Plan, which is to train the county's town councils, neighborhood associations, and other community organizations to become certified emergency response teams. Using the LA Fire Department Emergency Preparedness Guide as our primary resource, we see the game as another possible tool in the arsenal of public preparedness initiatives. In the game, a fast-moving fire approaches a house as a first-person character collects the maximum number of points by gathering the most essential items before time runs out. The game is meant to simulate a sense of urgency and teach users about the basic emergency supplies every household should be aware of. Authors of the Virtual Reality for Fire Evacuation research state, virtual environments provide a maximum of experimental control, are easy to replicate, have relatively high ecological validity, and allow safe study of occupant behavior in scenarios that otherwise would be too dangerous. Our second project, Conflair, plays with perspective by reversing the first-person view in the house fire game. The project states that for the year of 2019, the average amount of time that it took the Los Angeles Fire Department to respond to a structure fire was 5 minutes, during which a fire can spread quickly. Portraying this intensity, Conflair puts the player in the position of a spreading fire. Oculus Rift headset and touch controllers allow the player to simulate flames. Within 5 minutes, the player ignites as much as possible as the fire gradually engulfs the building. When the timer runs out, the fire department arrives to extinguish it. Gamification of an intense structural fire with the incorporation of real-life constraints aids a player in recognizing safe escape routes, flammable objects in structure fires, overcoming PTSD and other trauma-induced disorders, and familiarity with average LAFD response times. Our final project sample continues to play with shifting perspectives, applying the idea of resilience to the natural world. Models of Mutualism asks, how can we look to naturogenic systems as models of collective resilience? What mutually beneficial and unlikely relationships have formed between species who seemingly have nothing to offer each other? Featuring interviews and research by experts in community resilience, Models of Mutualism is a multimedia project that examines symbiotic bonds and the inspiration they provide as we work to build resilience in a time of isolation and upheaval. The Resilience Project is an ongoing and evolving tool. Eventually, it could be an open-source platform where experts, citizens, and students with applicable knowledge and interest could submit to the site, from audiovisual projects to research and statistics. The result would be an expanding experiential landscape of interactive knowledge and data-driven storytelling, with community resilience at its center. Credit goes to participating PCC students, student leads Crystal Brackett and Gigi Hall, and Professor Sylvia Ragone.
And I hope everybody had the chance to see the video presentation. And now we are open to hear your question. We'll be happy to answer whatever question you may have about the project.
We're going to turn it over to Rob Flo, our host, who will start that Q&A. Thank you.
Okay. What a great presentation and what a great way to learn. Most people don't have time to sit and read through these manuals, so that's perfect for teaching the whole county about disaster, so thank you. Let's start with, we have three members of the Chief Sustainability Officer Strategic Task Force of Los Angeles County. And let's start with Mark Spears, who is a founding member of that task force and was the CSO of Disney, now retired. So go ahead, Mark.
Thank you, Rob. And Sylvia, to you and the team, thank you so much for an amazing presentation. I've participated in all 8 of the 10 presentations thus far, and I find this one as comprehensive as any of the others seen, both from what you've demonstrated in terms of the materials that have been provided, but I think also the potential for this effort. It's also digestible. I think, as Rob mentioned, it can be pretty overwhelming to read the one county report, and I think as we look at something like the application and the components that you all have put together, you can easily envision readable understanding of what we're trying to accomplish with the plan. Also, the scalability of it, given that it's largely digital and user-friendly. Wanted to call out for those that are on and perhaps haven't had a chance to fully digest the materials that there are 4 components. There's a summary, there's the video that we just saw. There's actually a fascinating document called Models of Mutualism, which actually I think helped bring to life a lot of what you're talking about in your presentation. And last but certainly not least, an impactful, inspiring poem by Megan. So would encourage everyone to go back to the Pando site and take a look at those materials if you haven't. Also encouraged by the performance of Pasadena City College as a proud resident, a longtime resident of Pasadena as well, and really one of the premier institutions, certainly junior college institutions in the nation. You're representing our city incredibly well. And for those that aren't totally familiar with Pasadena City College, you're talking about a student base of roughly 30,000 people. So it's really a small city. And maybe with that as a segue, I have 2 questions. So let me ask both, and you can choose how you want to answer them. The first has to do with the team's view of what success looks like with the implementation of the project and how you all would measure it. And the second has to do with the concept of social capital, which I believe was mentioned in the models of mutualism research material, and where you all think we stand as a community, given the importance of drawing on that social capitalism for the power of the initiative that you're talking about, and what would be required to maximize social capital in terms of working together to deal with these kinds of issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the amazing and very important question that we have tried to think about, not really finding necessarily all the necessary answer, because they are really important topics and they're very complex topics. So I guess your first question is a little bit easier to answer, and maybe I'll leave it for later. And I will start with your question about social capital. And maybe I wonder if Gigi wants to answer that. She had collected research on what we mean when we talk about social capital and how important it is to the idea of resilience and community resilience.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak about that. Well, quickly touching on the idea of success, I think that's what makes resilience-centered initiatives hard to define, because resilience in of itself is hard to define, and then the success of those projects is hard to define, because traditional preparedness is focused on physical infrastructure, and community resilience is focused on social infrastructure. So I think part of the project is sort of connecting, I almost see it as like a microcosm of Pando in terms of connecting people that are from different disciplines. So connecting designers to scientists, because I'm by no means a scientist and none of us are scientists that worked on this, but connecting our skill sets to other people's skill sets is one of the more collaborative and interesting ways to measure connection. I think to see the product and the result of that collaboration is a success. And having it be open source, I think, is really important. Having it be publicly accessible, having the technology be accessible to people is part of my definition of success. So I think that kind of addresses it, but it is a hard thing to measure in any event, especially when we're in the midst of something, we're not after it, even with this pandemic. You know, success can be both the actual statistics of what's going on, but also on how connected we felt throughout the entire, you know, thing that we're living through right now. So yeah, I hope that semi-answered your question.
Thank you, Gigi. And I would like to maybe add to that and answer your very first question about maybe how you measure the success of the program. Going back to resilience, what we found from our research, even though it's almost intuitive, is that the more connected you are with the people in your community, more likely it is that you have a successful recovery in case of disaster, or that you will be able to overcome adversity. And so there are tools that sociologists put in place in how you measure this social capital. So how well you know your neighbors, who can you call if you need someone, like is really how much can you reach out for help, or how much can you help other in the case of need. For our particular project, we have opened it up in a sense as in this very first phase to different type of definition of resilience and also expression of resilience. So we can have a very pragmatic mission, which could be educational. So as we say in our presentation, we thought that one of the LA County goals was to increase the community capacity to respond to emergency. For example, having people that are certified in certain type of response. So this could be a tool for teaching that, and our house fire project sort of try to test that. You know, what happens if there is a fire? Do you know what you need to grasp? What is important that you take with you? Can you do it quickly? Do you know where it is? And can you evacuate fast enough? So this is very pragmatic. In a sense, is easier to measure. But then we have also this idea of creating community opportunity around the project. One of the first phase that we were thinking originally was to have maybe a public exhibition and panel and presentation, so that we will invite the community to maybe discuss and have conversation about these topics. And then maybe have the opportunity to try to get feedback from that and learn about what worked and what maybe didn't work so well. The other goals that we have is to, this is for me personally as a professor, is also a pedagogical tool. I am in the context of this amazing educational institution, and I have these students that are social capital. Can this project also be a form of contextualizing social responsibility for them and empowering them to build their own resilience? And this is also a project that I think will help in that regard.
Quick follow-on is, do you all consider PCC a community, given you've got 30,000 students plus or minus, and the fact that in all likelihood you will continue in some kind of digital, virtual, or online capacity going forward, and that the elements of this project could very well assist in keeping that community together in some fashion?
We definitely see PCC as a community, and as a community, not only in the name, there's a community college, but it's also a real community, not only because it has part of the history of Pasadena, but also is because it's a very special educational place that has an incredible amount of diversity, different voices, different experience, humanities, and being so different from a 4 years college or a master's degree or PhD, even being so much more open-ended, it really allowed us to become aware of the different type of experience and the different type of different opportunity to enrich ourselves through the community and the knowledge of the people that are part of PCC. We also think that, as with Pando, every person is connected to other people. So each individual student that may be a PCC is connected to a family, is connected to friends, is connected to another ecosystem. And so this will be just a starting point to propagate and disseminate some ideas that we think are very important.
Beautiful, Sylvia. Thank you. And Rob, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So our next questioner is Lorraine Lundquist. She's a professor at Cal State Northridge. She's a physicist, a climate activist, recent candidate for LA City Council, where she almost won. So thank you for being willing to do that, Lorraine. That's a sacrifice anytime you enter public service. So thank you, and go ahead with your questions.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here and really excited to be able to experience this presentation. And I want to thank the students that were involved and everyone that's been involved in this project for your hard work, and the quality of the products that you have produced really show that you were able to live this idea of resilience and put it into practice in your own lives through the resilience I'm sure you had to exhibit during the course of this 7 months in the middle of a pandemic. So thank you. I'm really interested in the fact that you decided to focus on informing the community and helping the community become informed as a way to develop a community capacity to respond to emergencies. And I understand that you envision the community accessing this online, and later as we open up more in public events and in public spaces and in galleries and that sort of thing. I want to know, as we live in this time of a pandemic where we find that people are in the middle of an emergency, and even in the middle of emergency when people are desperate for accurate information and want to know what is safe and what isn't safe and what they can do and what they can't do, it's difficult to find the correct information. And one of the hardest things about informing a community about a disaster that hasn't happened yet is just getting people to be motivated, to want to be interested in the information. And so how do you envision your community, whether it's Pasadena City College community as a target or the broader LA County population, how do you envision them being motivated to access the information in these incredible ways that you have developed to provide this information? How do you envision the most common reasons that people would be motivated to access the information, and how can we broaden that desire for people to engage with the material and access it?
Thank you so much for that question. It's so relevant because when we were thinking and exploring opportunities and ideas about this project, we reviewed the LA Fire Department pamphlet on disaster preparedness. And of course, pandemic is one of the various disasters that I have listed there. But in the beginning, we really paid very little attention to that because we had a memory of the fires that was so recent in our collective consciousness. It is also a very strange time. I think the state of emergency is accelerating, and we are going from one emergency to another. And I think maybe what is happening in the last couple of years, and I think there is a much more collective understanding that we are facing a shift and that it can affect us. We think that the opportunity of using this immersive experience is an opportunity that could help motivate people to take action, because it's a simulation of an event. And even though, as every simulation is, is a protective simulation, like you're not in any danger, but it shifts for a moment your perspective. And so you can be put in a simulation that maybe makes you think about what will you do if you were in that situation. And moreover, I thought it was very interesting the work that Crystal did, in which she taught how about we shift perspective, not only that we find ourselves in a simulated disaster and we learn what to do, but what about if we even shift body? What if we become the fire and we learn how to propagate? And part of what is necessary to do in education, not just with our students, but really the way that we need to shift our perspective of our living in the world, is that we need to shift from this anthropocentric privilege in which we understood our place in the world, and really try to look at how interconnected everything is. And maybe I would like Krista to talk about a little bit about the project that she made, because I thought that was a very interesting idea about that shift of perspective or experience.
Sure, yeah, I'll talk about it. The shift in perspective has to do with the overall duality of the experience. So in terms of what we relatively think of when it comes to a disaster, we think of ourselves in the first person. And while that might be beneficial for some immersion or educational experiences, being within the perspective of the actual disaster that is, say, approaching or around, like such as COVID-19, it's there, but it's not exactly approaching us like the fire would be. It gives a way to interpret the knowledge on that scale. So instead of preparing yourself to exit or leave or something like that in that aspect, you actually get to know the inner workings of how this disaster is going to affect you and what it's going to do in these situations, so that you can better prepare yourself for what it will do around you. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. And I really appreciate those answers. And you know, where I am in the San Fernando Valley, we have a Valley Emergency Preparedness Fair every year, and we have a lot of people come to that motivated to get free equipment. They get a disaster preparedness kit, and I can imagine this kind of immersive experience maybe being something that they get to experience in that kind of an event before they get their disaster preparedness materials, so they can imagine how to use them. And I also want to know, I would like to ask about climate change and how our current climate emergency informed your decisions with the project to engage with the community in the ways that you did.
Well, we know that social justice is very much connected to climate change and issues of sustainability, issues of ecology. So, especially in urban setting, and even globally. So it's very important that we connect these dots too, like to see how different community may be affected differently, or may be prepared differently, or may respond differently, so that we can support in both ends. So prevent, of course, the first thing, prevent this disaster from happening, but also make sure that we have there is a sort of justice in the way that we respond to it as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. Our next questioner is Catherine Miller, former Chief Sustainability Officer and Campus Facilities Manager for the Conrad Hilton Foundation. She was responsible for building the extraordinary LEED building that many of us have been in Agoura Hills, and she's coming to us from Colorado. Catherine?
Great. Thank you very much. And I'm really pleased to be here today with you. And Sylvia, you and your team at Pasadena City College did an excellent job on this. I think as I was going through and just, you know, watching the presentation and reading through the materials, you know, I was struck by how relevant, you know, all of that really is, considering the fact that we had the events like the Woolsey fire occurred just a very short, you know, period of time ago, and what the lessons learned from the fire and responding, and how that ultimately could be linked to what, your project is and what you've worked on with the virtual simulation. I also noticed in the write-up that you referenced community like meditation that would be part of this project. So I wanted to ask a question about that. And I also wanted to point out that I did listen to the poem that was also a part of your project and found that, extremely moving. I really enjoyed listening to it. It was very dramatic, very passionate, pragmatic and moving. So I just wanted to speak to that. And additional questions I had too is around, you've done the simulation around the fire and being prepared and how to respond to that. But what are some thoughts around the next phases that you would have? Would there be simulations around earthquake and how to respond to earthquake and flooding? And even an example with the pandemic that we're dealing with now too. I mean, I know that's very broad, but that could be encapsulated, would that be something that, the team has considered? And then the last, I know I had few questions in here. It's who do you see managing this app on a long-term basis, and how again would that be updated, rolled out, and to continue to add real-time value as impacts, and we're realizing impacts to our communities. So with that.
Thank you so much for these questions. I hope I remember all of them, and please tell me if I forget to answer something. So I guess I'm gonna step back for a moment and say that this project really came from a lot of conversation that we had and experimentation about the potential for the tools. And we kind of identified 3 areas that we think the project that we presented represents and stands for. We talked about the immersive experience and the simulation to aid disaster preparedness. But the other 2 components that we envisioned that could be part of the project is data visualization, how to present data in a way that is more compelling, that is more, that you can experience in a different way. And the third component is the space for personal storytelling, for artistic expression, for stories, for voices that talk about resilience, for expression of the humanity that morph the meaning of resilience. And so this virtual meditation is something that we had originally conceived for that. It's just one of the projects that we have taught, and we actually did not test it yet. But we wanted to have something that was also more open-ended and for the expression and for allowing this diversity of voices to emerge. And in that context, the poem that we added as a supplemental material speaks to that, almost like a spiritual dimension of resilience. And maybe I would love for Megan to say a few words about it, because she's working on this poem also to take it to the next step. And I would like her to tell you more about her project.
Hi, yeah, I can definitely do that. I guess I'll go ahead and answer the question in the chat about the motivation too. Well, originally I started writing this piece a long time ago when I first started at PCC, and I think what originally inspired me to write it was just to create something with a lot of visual imagery that I could use in conjunction with my studies in animation and motion arts. So I actually created this to be animated, and I'm still in the process of working on the storyboard and animatic for that. But ultimately, I think a lot of my work at PCC was very environmentally focused, and a lot of my other projects that I did were about sustainability, building a circular economy, and about social justice. The poem became very personal for me, and I think if you listen to it, you know there's a lot about it. It's not just about disaster preparedness. It unpacks like a lot. But I think, you know, my experiences as, you know, a bisexual mixed Black woman and living in Black communities, kind of driven by my passions for Pride movement and BLM, and just the overwhelming sadness of, you know, all these murders kind of played a role in the direction that I ended up going. I also want to say that the vocal part of the poem was performed by my very good friend and musical artist, Davinia Fakori, who's not here, but I believe that she deserves a lot of credit for like helping me bring it to fruition. As the title of the piece suggests, I think it's about building resiliency through dismantling oppressive, destructive, or unsustainable systems in order to rebuild like a more circular and symbiotic environment in all regards. But yeah, I have always been passionate about environmental issues and just paths to sustainability, which I think is the main focus of the piece. But I also wanted to explore how different kinds of bigotry kind of play a major role in the social sphere, and how people like myself who identify as progressives, you know, we're still having to combat things like racism, homophobia, you know, in the forms of things like police brutality and discrimination. And while all those causes, you know, fighting against them may be very just and noble, they're very draining, and it can, you know, often leave very little energy for all the environmental things that I also care about. And it's a lot, you know, and I just wanted to explore the societal pressures to remain positive about the state of the world in our own lives, and how that can breed like a passivity that's not really conducive to implementing calls for action and bringing about systemic change. But ultimately, I just wanted to inspire people, I think, and, you know, combine written word with animation to like get how I just feel about the changes that need to happen in the world. And that's it, pretty much.
Thank you. I was going to ask you, when you talk about, you know, putting a storyboard together to that poem, is that something that you're going to be posting, you know, at large, say, on YouTube or in some other, you know, fashion that gets that out there to a broader audience?
Currently the storyboard isn't. It was part of my capstone piece for completing my program at PCC. But I guess I'm still in touch to like preliminary stages of the animation still, that it's not out there yet, but I do want to have it on YouTube. Also maybe to try to have funding to have people help me. You know, as you know, the poem is about 5 minutes. That's a big length of time for an animation for just only myself to complete. But yeah, I think it's still kind of in the preliminary stages, but yeah, I definitely want to have an animatic that's kind of final and accessible to people online. That will also be a way for me to help get people more involved, and hopefully get some like funds for the people that will hopefully end up working on it with me.
Well, it's definitely emotionally packed, and I hope that you will consider sharing it with, you know, the group here at Pando, you know, however the outcome works out for you. I did want to just also, Sylvia, ask about the meditation piece that I think is referred to in the write-up. Can you just touch on that just briefly?
Yes. This meditation piece right now is still a conceptual piece. So I've done a work with my students that were beginning in the beginning class of 3D modeling animation, and I had asked them to think about 3 objects that represent resilience for them. So their personal resilience, the resilience of the community, what is resilience in the communities around them, and what is the resilience of what they identify with. And so my idea was that I will create a virtual reality garden with these sculptures, and this sculpture maybe will be connected to sounds, to voice, to story, so that will become more a contemplative space to explore the different voices of resilience.
Okay.
We didn't implement it, but that's what another of this type of content that could be part of this more this third part of the project.
Okay, thank you. And I again just want to thank you and you know, the students for a really very well thought out approach to this. And I very much have enjoyed, you know, watching the presentation as well as reading the material, and very touched by it. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Go back to Rob to wrap it up.
So Eugene, do you want to ask any other questions?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. We just have a little bit of time, but there have been some very interesting questions come in here through chat, which would be great to get to. By the way, happy for anyone to enter any additional in if they have them now as we go along. I was struck by the phases for implementation. I love the way, in a very practical way, it gets going there in a gallery or, you know, something, you know, that's so interesting. As you think about implementation, from a very practical standpoint, is the team kind of, where is the team? How will this move forward? Is this really you, Sylvia? Would it move forward through another class? Do you see another kind of partner needed to help be able to move forward, and talk a little bit about the phases as it relates to the team, if you would.
Thank you for the question. So the phases, we have 4 phases in our road plan. The first phase is a little bit easier to implement. So the idea of creating either an in-person exhibition or a virtual exhibitions, it will be about really working, generating the content, and then put it together in some form and use that as a starting point to develop further. But ultimately, I think it will be great to create partnership, or definitely have some type of consultant that will help us maybe with the back end of the project, especially if we are really thinking to make it online and to make it public. And hopefully maybe to open up collaboration with even other entity, other programs at PCC that they may want to help us maintaining and populating this environment. The nature of community college is that it's a little bit different the way it's structured than a 4-year college. So our courses are all open-ended, which means that I may have students that may be with us for years, but I also have students that I only see them for 1 semester and then I don't see them anymore. So for some reason, we wanted to create this as an opportunity to allow the individual students to create projects, to create work that could be then hosted by this infrastructure if you want. So definitely scalability may be something that will need some type of collaboration and partnership. While phase 1 and 2, I think they're still manageable by me and my students, and maybe some other faculty in our program that are interested and willing to participate.
Good. And Sylvia, just to spin off on that and to relate to a question from Heather Barker, is the idea then just a landscape onto which then anyone can contribute virtually anything, or is there a kind of visual direction that your team would be giving, or is it kind of like any landscape in the real world? You just, everything goes. So how do you define the visual language here and all?
Well, we definitely want to curate, I will say, the experience. So even though we want to make it open-ended as much as possible, we also want to have maybe a curated trajectory, if you want to call it that way, that are organized maybe thematically and also organized with the visual component and the interface. So we don't know exactly what that is, that we're very excited maybe to have the opportunity to explore that in our next phase, what it actually will look like. But yes, it's almost like entering, as you say, a natural environment and then navigating through that. And you may find direction, you may find areas that you want to explore. But it's also a journey. There is also room for exploration.
Mark Spears had asked a follow-up question whether the approach would have been different in any way, or some of the content might have been different in any way if the rise of the pandemic had fallen differently than it did within the process. Do you have any?
I think for sure it will have be different. And maybe that's actually a topic that we can explore moving forward. It's interesting to see, how can we approach a theme like this from all these different perspectives. GG research on model of mutualism is an example of how you can shift perspective. You can also shift scale, right? The connection between the microscopic and the microscopic and the macro, yes. So the things that are invisible, that affect us, affect our body, and maybe create project that deals with awareness, maybe create projects that deals with understanding how the virus spreads, maybe create projects that are meant to give hope and support and think about different ways that we can be together or creating community, even if we cannot be physically together. Explore, also how people is affected on a personal level, what happened within your family when you have to change your way of life so dramatically. So answering the question, I think, yes, I think it will have influence the content of our project for sure.
I love how it brings resilience so closely into focus from an environmental issue and whatever. I mean, the focus is resilience, and then we kind of open up to these other kinds of issues. But I love the way it anchors in resilience. Rob, back to you.
Thank you. Well, I certainly found it fascinating. I could go for another couple of hours on this. I think your area of expertise is perfect for teaching us about these issues. Like I said, I do, 8 hours of research a day. Last thing I want to do is read another research report. So if I had your tools available to me and my friends, and if that was broadly promoted, I think it would be very powerful. And there's, like Eugene said, there's so many topics you can go on. So keep us in the loop, keep me in the loop in terms of any funding needs you have. Once this is over, we could do an event for you and your school and your project here again if you'd like. And thank you all for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rob, for all of your support and your generosity and for hosting this event. Many thanks to Sylvia, Gigi, and the entire Pasadena College team for creating such a fascinating initiative. Everyone, please remember you can see all of the PCC presentation materials on our website, pandopopulous.com. A recording of today's presentation will be up by tomorrow night. Many thanks to the members of the CSO task force who responded today, Mark Spears, Lorraine Lundquist, and Catherine Miller. Many thanks to Pando Days curator Adam Ewens, festival producer Shelley Goldstein, producer Betsy Hunter, and presentation consultant Judith Parker. Pando Days was conceived with the help of the CSO Strategic Task Force and made possible by the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation, Second Home, and the Mary Knowles sisters, along with many others. Make sure to join us this coming Friday at 1 o'clock for the premiere presentation by Woodbury University of their new initiative, Saltwater Gardens. You can get a preview of it on our website right now. Thank you all again for joining us, and have a great afternoon.